My name is Dina Peone, and I am a lecturer of nonfiction at the University of Chicago, program in creative writing. I'm very excited to be a part of this new virtual reading series, Writers in Residence, and very excited to be sharing some of my nonfiction with you today, which is April 21st, 2020, and the time is 6:42 p.m. I'm broadcasting to you from my hometown, Saugerties, New York, and I want to say a special thank you to Rachel Galvin, Jesse Haley, Mei Huang, and Starsha Gill, and all the other student participants who are behind the creation of this very exciting new virtual reading series. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be a part of it and to be teaching at the university this spring quarter. Thank you. So I'm going to be sharing 4 nonfiction works, the first of which is published in the most recent issue of the Bat City Review, issue number 16. And it's called Because I Could. Because I could reach the alarm, I pulled it. Not a yank, but a gentle tug. I was still too young to read, but I knew what the sign said. And I knew the act was forbidden. How could I resist the intense bright red when I was tall enough on my tippy toes and all of my fingers fit perfectly under the handle? Opening week at Red Lobster was all my parents had talked about. Even though it was snowing and Christmas was coming, and my father had recently lost his job, the 5 of us piled into his van. Myself, your exhibitionist of horrors. My father, who would order filet of sole thinking it was like filet mignon. My sister, who would need a diaper change as soon as they placed her in the booster seat. My brother, who slapped my face every 5 minutes for his own amusement. And my mother, who chain smoked from Saugerties to Kingston. Her nerves were already tested by my screaming pleas to stop. Oh, pretty, please stop. Why can't we stop? Just for a few minutes. At the Hudson Valley Mall, where Mom had banned me from going shopping with her on account of my tendency to disappear as soon as she wasn't looking. I would often hide inside the circular clothing racks, breathing quiet, shallow breaths into the slits of parted blouses, watching as Mom walked by with a security guard, calling out my name. I know you can hear me. She does this all the time. Decades later, my father explains, for whatever reason, Dina, you went through a phase where you were uncontrollable. Your brother didn't. Your sister didn't. We had no idea what to do with you. So we called you Dina Disaster. I don't remember pulling the alarm, only that my father had rushed off to the bathroom a minute or so before the idea even crossed my mind. He was sitting on the toilet when the shrill kicked in, and an automated voice crackled on the intercom. Attention, please. There has been a fire reported in the building. Please proceed to the nearest exit and leave immediately. He wiped his ass quicker than he zipped his jeans. Out in the parking lot, he took one look at me and knew exactly what had happened. The sirens approached and I pressed my palms hard against my earmuffs. I looked around at the frowning grown-ups wearing bibs with melted butter dribbling down their chins, my baby sister shivering in her new carrier, my parents shaking their heads, and my brother who hadn't slapped me in at least 10 minutes. The fire engines turned around as soon as they entered the lot, and I thought, that's it? If only I had known that it was not really a false alarm, that later my first French kiss would go down in the parking lot of the Glasgow firehouse, and that somewhere on the other side of town, the boy who would become my high school sweetheart had already uttered his first word, hot. I wouldn't have been so disappointed then, if only I could have seen 11 years into the future, how a candle would grow overnight to swallow my home, disfiguring most of my teenage body, a burn that would eventually lead to the amputation of the same fingers that pulled the alarm at Red Lobster. I never went back. Yesterday, I called the restaurant to apologize, and the manager humored me. Well, I'm so glad you lived to tell the tale. I could have told her about the fire, but I know that would have alarmed her. Next, I'll be reading a poem for Jillian Weisse called How to Have Sex with an Amputee, or What to Do When All Limbs Cannot Be Kept Inside the Ride. 1. Foreplay. It doesn't matter which hand. Touch her neck. This will remind her that she has a head. Inch across the collarbone, squeeze the shoulder, caress the bicep. Switch to your lips. Careful not to tickle or startle the amputee. Keep going. Do not stop at nothing. That is, when you reach the terminal parts, tongue along a stream of air until you're out of the room. 2. Intercourse. Do not be offended by the silence. You should consider it spiritual. Pause. Look the amputee in the eyes. Act like you know a secret. Remember, you are inside, where it counts. 3. Afterwards. Once you dismount and reconnect with the air, your partner might continue to writhe. Do not be alarmed. You can ask questions. She is not possessed but visited by your phantom. Give her some space. Soon it will pass, and then you can rejoin your parts. Next, I'll be reading Edgar and Casey, which is issue 1 of Dear Ghostfingers, an advice column that I started this year, and an experiment in creative nonfiction that engages art and literature in order to approach problems of being. Ghostfingers is a narrative persona crafted by Dina Peone, not to be confused with Dina Peone. Dear Ghostfingers, my grandmother, who was a witch and a medium, used to be in constant communication with me. She cut off communication on May 10, 1972. Do you think she could be angry with me? I can think of nothing that I did. At least not since 1972, when she and I lost contact. And she was communicating with me before 1972. She left her worldly body then, but I never thought that would make a difference. I get obscure messages like a field of violets on significant anniversaries, and feelings like she's with me. How do I tell her to be more direct with her messages? Thanks, Edgarina Casey. And I should note that this is a real submission. Somebody reading my advice column asked me if I had crafted that, and no, this is a real advice column. And here is Ghostfinger's response. Dear Edgarina Casey, there should be a word for the opposite of a haunting. That you refer to your grandmother in the present tense calls to mind a poem by Rainer Maria Rilke. In it, the speaker demands faith in eternal life from the perspective of the hypothetically deceased. Extinguish my eyes, I'll go on seeing you. Seal my ears, I'll go on hearing you. And without feet I can make my way to you. Without a mouth I can swear your name. Break off my arms, I'll take hold of you. With my heart as with a hand. Stop my heart and my brain will start to beat. And if you consume my brain with fire, I'll feel you burn in every drop of my blood. I don't know what makes me more uncomfortable. How the speaker of Rilke's poem insists that a physical sensation can exist apart from a sensory organ, or how the assumed listener's tests of doubt would equate to pointless sadism. In Rilke's poem, the drama of non-being escalates to a state of chaos that is physically unfathomable, seemingly for the sake of convincing skeptics like me that imagination is all it takes to overcome the impossible. I don't believe in the afterlife any more than I believe in the touch of my own flesh on my lover's skin, but I admire anyone's willingness to wait and listen for signals from beyond. It sounds like your grandmother had a special gift, and with that comes heightened expectations of her bodiless spirit and its theoretical range of influence. Rilke teaches students of faith like ourselves that sometimes we must take matters, or the lack thereof, into our own hands, acting as our own witnesses to the divine, as interdimensional ventriloquists. I wonder what would emerge if you attempted to channel your grandmother's voice inside the space of a poem. Maybe you already contain the answers you seek from without. A sign is only such because its signifier says so. If you accept that all meaning is subjective, that symbols such as significant dates and feelings are mere vessels for that which cannot be contained in any absolute way, but briefly expressed through implied relationships that vary from interpreter to interpreter, then you need not look any further than a symbol itself, say, a field of violets, for evidence of the most direct possibilities of your truth. In this sense, there is no real difference between receiving and perceiving a so-called message. Consider, too, how sometimes a lack of signage follows a lack of attentiveness. While my name suggests that I identify as part ghost, I cannot speak for the deceased. I imagine that, if there is such a thing as an afterlife, then it is primarily ruled by nostalgia, the longing to replay even the most time-worn tape. What if all your grandmother should ever want to say to you has already been said? What if death had a grammar of its own, a subject that requires no object or verb? What if a field of violets is only ever a field of violets? I feel myself spiraling now down a bottomless kaleidoscope of doubt and astonishment. Thank you for that feeling. If you sincerely believe that your grandmother has no reason to be angry with you, then why trouble yourself worrying that you have offended her? It could be the case that your grandmother has simply lost her supernatural abilities upon leaving the body that made those abilities possible. It wasn't clear from your query whether her death and the loss of contact co-occurred on May 10, 1972, but I assumed so. I remain hopeful that you will reconnect with her one way or another. In the meantime, follow Rilke's cue and take hold of her with your heart. Why do metaphors exist if not to transport our hopes? Yours in wonder, Ghost Fingers. Before I move on, I will say that submissions to Dear Ghost Fingers are accepted on a rolling basis. You can find me, or Ghost Fingers rather, at tinyletter.com/Dina-Peone. Now I'll be reading an essay called An Amputee Looks Through a Ring. This salmon pink coral gemstone is smooth and vacant. A hemisphere no seeker of beauty would care to conquer. I had never seen a ring so plain looking, so unremarkable that now I struggled to recall where I found it. I was 13, the age at which many of my female classmates began to collect glittery tiaras and feathery ear piercings from Claire's accessories in order to feel more like Cher from Clueless. I must have liked the ring for its non-conforming attitude, how it seemed destined to be discarded in a free box at an antique flea market. When I first tried it on, the band was tarnished, like someone had left it out in the rain. I decided the ring was precious simply because no one else would want it. I might have associated the ring's unprepossessing nature with that of Jane, a teenage goth character from my favorite movie at the time, American Beauty. Jane's mother asks her in their first scene together, "Honey, are you trying to look unattractive?" I admired Jane's choice to wear baggy pants and a muted flannel. How countercultural, how unfeminine and indifferent. I never would have guessed that in my 30th year, I'd be rubbing this ring's surface warm in an attempt to draw out some of its talismanic power to make me feel deliberately ugly again. It's not that I lack self-esteem. I typically enjoy when strangers try to hide how they're staring at my scars. But often I act in imitation of my former self, the unscarred self who intentionally donned mismatched socks of different lengths and didn't care to wipe the black nail polish from her cuticles. Impersonation, like keeping objects that belonged to the deceased, is one style of mourning. And I let this ring function as a mirror, reflecting those parts of me that are deeply buried, but still kicking. Here's a kick. Sometimes I feel bad for the beautiful, how they must feel so invisible. It sounds more bitter than ironic, but I have always suspected that physical attractiveness is more of a curse than a gift, as radiant surfaces tend to deflect from the interior world of composition, limiting the beholder with a superficial understanding of the beheld, and amplifying the latter's capacity for loneliness. In her essay Street Haunting, Virginia Woolf writes of the eye, "It rests only on beauty. Like a butterfly, it seeks color and basks in warmth. But the eye is animated by imperfections, pattern deviations, and the stretch of incomprehensible shadows." The ring's centerpiece looks bruised by the sun, with ripples of white. They remind me of those thin, plasma-like creatures of light I've seen dancing at the bottoms of swimming pools. The cut of the metal band makes the ring appear braided, anything but solid. This band was not designed to close around the finger, or so I remind myself in order to make peace with the fact that the ring no longer fits me. It's one of those flexible bands that cinches into position. After 17 years in my possession, the two halves of the band are pointing in different directions. I'm afraid to bend either side back into place, lest the ring loses its historical significance, its talismanic power, its preciousness. I wore it on my right middle finger, one of 10 short but slender, pale, nervous, guitar-blistered fingers which melted in a room on fire during my 16th year. The skin and muscle on every one of my right hand's fingers slid off the bone. settling over time into a shape I'd describe as not very finger-like. Gangrene crept in, ate the charred leftovers. A doctor whose name I do not know decided that my fingers could no longer be called fingers, and the only remaining choice was to amputate and then amputate again. I must have owned other rings, although I don't remember them. Like my fingers, almost every other personal item I owned in those years got incinerated. I don't know how this artifact survived, if it got plucked from a pile of ashes in my backyard, or if I might have accidentally left it with a friend, away from harm. Funny how the innocence radiating from my ring appears perfectly preserved, and yet, if I listen closely, it teaches me, with a grandmotherly wisdom, that I was fully equipped for handling the task of shedding my skin, of transforming into something less physically appealing. The younger version of me would have liked to believe that I did so in the name of something deeper than flesh, the kind of beauty that remains unseen, otherworldly, as in the case of my amputated index and pinky. The older version of me knows that I was on no such quest, nothing quite so profound, that I merely awoke in a burning room and flailed with a dumb urgency unlike any other. Isn't it funny how you never think of grabbing yourself in the event of a house fire? Maybe the ring was always this crooked, and I just can't remember because my hands, as functional as they were beautiful, could only be seen as a constant blur of activity, whether they were scribbling cursive poetry about how I felt incomplete, strumming a Fender Stratocaster to songs about unbelonging, or painting acrylic self-portraits that could pierce holes in my non-existent viewer's soul, demanding their fullest attention. It doesn't matter. Crooked or straight, the metal band still shimmers. I turn it over and over in the glow of my desk lamp, expecting to see some hidden feature. My fingers take turns probing the void. I try to slide it over my thick scar tissue, to force it over my deformed joints, but the thing gets stuck at every twist. Recently, someone grimaced as they admitted to disliking the use of the word deformed in the context of my hands, as if a failure of description could further condemn me to the permanent indecency of my condition. I decide that the word, like my unglamorous ring that no longer fits me, has more value than any of its preferable counterparts. For anything with which we might decorate ourselves only distracts from the exactness of what's undeniably there, or in my case, no longer there. Yet here I am using a handful of words as a compass in my search for something that feels irretrievable. As I twirl the ring around the tip of my left middle finger, hoping to reconnect with the parts of myself that have detached, the ring's unpolished haze intimates the contours of my silhouette, and the shimmering negative space beyond inspires me to wonder if the ring can truly be said to symbolize loss. If I had originally used it for contradicting beauty. As in a dream, I hear the ring whisper, "Your flesh is both the compass and the territory." What does it mean? I ask my mother. She has no clue what the ring is trying to tell me, but she reminds me that the ring was hers. She gave it to me. It was always this crooked, and she thinks that both the ring and her daughter are beautiful. I would thank her, but as it turns out, voids fit perfectly inside voids. Thank you very much.